Do you have a paranormal encounter you'd like to share with us? Send us an email with your story for a chance of it being featured on Weird World. In the summer of 1983, the Strain family moved into their first house in Sitka, Alaska. Kim Strain, an 11-year-old girl at the time, was thrilled about the prospect of having her own room in this new home. The family had previously lived in apartments, moving frequently due to her father's job as a safety consultant. This move to Sitka marked a significant change in their lives, but little did they know that their excitement would soon be overshadowed by a series of strange and unsettling events. The house itself was unremarkable at first glance. It was a 3-bedroom ranch-style mill house built by the company where Kim's father worked as a safety inspector. The neighbourhood consisted of identical houses, cookie-cutter homes, lined up neatly along the street. However, the Strains' property stood out from the rest. Their house had an additional extension, making it slightly larger than its neighbours'. More notably, it sat on an oddly shaped piece of land, full of mounds, and situated on a hill, in stark contrast to the flat lot surrounding it. Initially, the family settled in without incident. Kim and her sister squabbled over who got which room, a normal disagreement for siblings their age. The first few months passed uneventfully, with the family enjoying the newfound space and privacy of having their own home. But as summer transitioned into fall, Kim began to notice subtle changes in the atmosphere of the house. It started with whispers. Kim would often hear what sounded like muffled conversations, as if a radio was playing at low volume in another room. Curious and slightly unnerved, she would search the house, trying to locate the source of these phantom broadcasts. But every time she investigated, she found nothing. No radios left on, no television playing in empty rooms. The sounds seemed to emanate from within the very walls of the house, fading in and out like ghostly transmissions from an unseen realm. As the days grew shorter and the long Alaskan winter approached, the incidents escalated. One evening in late October, Kim's father left for a business trip. Excited by the prospect of having the master bedroom to herself, Kim eagerly claimed her father's waterbed and settled in to watch television, a bowl of freshly popped popcorn by her side. It was around 9:30 p.m. when Kim first heard the strange rustling sound. It seemed to be coming from behind the bedroom door, which stood open against the wall. Initially thinking it was one of her family's many cats or dogs, Kim paused her chewing, searching with her eyes and ears to locate the source of the noise. But when silence fell, she shrugged it off and returned her attention to the television show. Moments later, an event occurred that would haunt Kim for years to come. As she sat there, her attention locked on the show, a voice suddenly spoke directly into her right ear. As clear as day, as if someone was leaning in close, it said, "Excuse me, Kim." The words themselves were innocuous, even polite, but the circumstances, alone in a room where no one else should be, hearing a disembodied voice speak her name, sent a jolt of pure terror through Kim's body. She froze, her mouth going dry and her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her ears. The bowl of popcorn sat forgotten in her lap as she struggled to process what had just happened. Before she could react, it happened again, the same words in the same unnaturally close proximity. "Excuse me, Kim." This second utterance broke the paralysis that had gripped her. With a shriek of fear, Kim leapt from the bed, scattering popcorn across the floor as she bolted for the living room. Kim burst into the living room, her face pale and her body trembling. Her mother looked up from her book, startled by her daughter's sudden appearance. "What's wrong, Kim?" she asked, with a look of concern. Between gasps for air, Kim recounted her terrifying experience. As she spoke, she noticed something peculiar about the incident that she hadn't realised in the moment. During those brief seconds when the voice spoke, it was as if all other sounds had been stripped away. The television show, even the sound of her own breathing, had vanished, leaving only that eerie voice in a vacuum of silence. Kim's mother tried to calm her daughter. She suggested that perhaps Kim had dozed off and had a particularly vivid dream, or that her imagination had run wild in the unfamiliar setting of the master bedroom. But Kim knew what she had heard. It was no dream, no figment of her imagination. Something had spoken to her, something that didn't belong in their new home. That night, Kim refused to return to the master bedroom. Instead, her mother went to turn off the television and clean up the scattered popcorn. But Kim wouldn't even step foot in the room to retrieve her belongings. She spent a sleepless night on the living room couch, jumping at every creak and groan of the house settling. This incident marked the beginning of a series of strange occurrences that would plague the Strain family over the next few years. While Kim's experience in the master bedroom was the most intense, it was far from the last. As the months passed, Kim began to feel an increasing sense of unease in the house. She would often catch movement out of the corner of her eye, only to turn and find empty space. The whispers she had first noticed grew more frequent, sometimes sounding like urgent conversations just on the edge of comprehensibility. Kim's next significant encounter occurred almost a year after the bedroom incident. It was a crisp autumn afternoon in 1984, and Kim, now 12, was walking home from a friend's house. As she rounded the curve in the road that gave her a clear view of her house, she glanced up, expecting to see the familiar sight of her mother moving about in the kitchen. What she saw instead made her blood run cold. There, framed in the kitchen window, was a figure that looked like her mother, but wrong. The face bore her mother's features, but they were twisted into a mask of pure malevolence. Eyes that should have been warm and loving, blazed with hatred, fixed directly on Kim as if they had been waiting for her. Kim froze in her tracks, her mind reeling. What could she have done to provoke such anger? As she stood there, the figure in the window seemed to track her movements, its gaze never wavering. Panic rising in her chest, Kim broke into a run, racing towards the house to confront whatever was waiting for her inside. She burst through the front door, calling out for her mother. "Mom, Mom, where are you?" Her voice echoed through the empty house. All the lights were on, just as they usually were, but no one was home. Kim searched every room, her fear growing with each empty space she encountered. Finally, she reached for the phone with trembling hands and dialed her mother's work number. She answered on the third ring, her voice cheerful and utterly normal. "Hi, honey, is everything okay?" Kim's voice broke as she explained what she had seen. Her mother, concerned by her daughter's distress, explained that she and Kim's father were at a work function and wouldn't be home for several hours. She offered to come home early, but Kim, not wanting to disrupt her parents' evening, insisted she would be fine. After hanging up, Kim couldn't bring herself to stay in the house. She sat on the front porch, wrapped in a blanket, waiting for her parents to return. As she sat there, she couldn't shake the image of that hateful face in the window. It had looked so much like her mother, yet so fundamentally wrong. The malice in those eyes seemed to linger in her mind, a stark contrast to the warm, loving gaze she associated with her mother. When Kim's parents returned home that evening, they found their daughter huddled on the porch, shivering despite the blanket. Kim recounted her experience again, this time to both parents. Her father was sceptical, suggesting that the stress of moving and adjusting to a new school might be affecting Kim's imagination. Her mother, however, was more open to the possibility of something supernatural. "You know, Kim," Sarah said thoughtfully, "I've always believed that some people are more sensitive to other things that most people can't see or hear. Maybe you're one of those people." Kim wasn't sure if this explanation made her feel better or worse. On one hand, it validated her experiences. Her mother believed her at least. On the other hand, the idea that she might be particularly attuned to supernatural phenomena was unsettling. Would this mean more encounters in the future? As the years passed, the strange occurrences in the Strain house continued, though never again reaching the intensity of Kim's first two major experiences. The disembodied whispers remained a constant, like background noise that one could almost, but never quite, tune out. Objects would mysteriously move or disappear, only to reappear in unlikely places days later. Cold spots would appear in rooms, persisting even when the heating was turned up. Kim learned to live with these anomalies, developing coping mechanisms to deal with the constant undercurrent of unease. She avoided being alone in the house whenever possible, especially in the master bedroom where she had heard the voice. When she did find herself alone, she would play music or keep the television on, anything to drown out the whispers that seemed to lurk just at the edge of hearing. As Kim grew older and eventually moved out of the house, she hoped that her experiences with the supernatural were behind her. However, the Strain family continued to own the property, renting it out to tenants over the years. Occasionally, Kim would hear stories from these tenants that echoed her own experiences. Whispers in empty rooms, feelings of being watched, unexplained noises in the night. Years later, when Kim was in her early 30s and a mother herself, circumstances brought her back to Sitka and the house where she had spent her adolescence. Living there again as an adult, she found that while the intensity of the supernatural activity had diminished, it had not disappeared entirely. Her own children began to have experiences in the house. Kim's youngest daughter refused to sleep in the same room where Kim had heard the voice decades earlier. This was especially strange, as she had never divulged her experience in that room to her children. For 3 years, from ages 5 to 8, her youngest daughter insisted that an owl lived in the closet of that room, watching her with unblinking eyes whenever she tried to sleep there. Kim's son also had his own frightening encounter when he was 14. One summer afternoon, Kim sent him back to the house from a family picnic in a nearby park to retrieve a forgotten item. Finding the doors locked, he decided to enter through his bedroom window. As he was climbing in, he distinctly heard multiple voices inside the house discussing his entry. "He's coming through the window," they said. "What are we going to do?" Terrified, Kim's son abandoned the task and ran back to the park, refusing to enter the house alone again for weeks afterwards. These incidents indicated to Kim that whatever presences inhabited the house in Sitka, they had not left. They seemed to have a particular focus on children, perhaps drawn to their more open and receptive minds. As Kim reflected on her family's history with the house, she couldn't help but wonder about its origins. The house had been built in the late 1940s, part of a development to house workers for the local mill. Rumours circulated about the previous occupants, a family plagued by hardship, with children constantly in and out of legal trouble. Kim often wondered whether the negative energy from those earlier residents had somehow imprinted itself on the house, creating the phenomena she and her family experienced. Despite the many bizarre and often terrifying occurrences, the Strain family never felt compelled to leave the house permanently. It remained a part of their lives, a constant source of both comfort and unease. However, the experiences they shared there bonded them in a unique way, creating a shared history of the unnerving and unexplained that they carried with them even when they were far from Sitka. For Kim, now a 52-year-old certified nurse's assistant living in Anchorage, the memories of those years in Sitka remain vivid. While she has never again experienced anything as intense as the voice in the bedroom or the malevolent face in the window, she has remained acutely aware of the thin veil between the world we know and the mysteries that lie just beyond our understanding.